Hello everyone, welcome to the free beginner rigging course in Blender. You might have heard that rigging is one of the most complex and challenging steps in the 3D animation process. Don't worry, follow me step by step, and you'll see how easy and understandable this seemingly difficult task can be. In this course we will rig Luxo Jr, a character from Pixar, which is very appealing and useful. Our plan is to get familiar with the tools and settings in the software that help us create a proper rig for our object. During this project, we will get to know the necessary tools for rigging step by step. No need to worry, by the end of this course, you'll be able to start your own project. I will be here with you to answer any questions or challenges you might have. In this episode, we'll take a step-by-step approach to preparing a model for rigging. First, we'll gently walk through mesh placement, orientation, and the importance of naming different parts of your model. We'll then simplify and merge parts to make the rigging process more manageable. Finally, we'll carefully analyze how the character should move to ensure a smooth rigging process. Let's proceed at a comfortable pace. Once we've completed the essential steps, we'll move on to placing the bones, taking the time to introduce and explain the different types of bones and their characteristics. We'll gently explore how all the parts of the rig work together, including the concepts of IK, inverse kinematics, and FK, forward kinematics, and discuss the pole vector and the challenges it presents. Next, we'll carefully attach the bones to the character, and show you two different methods for doing this. We'll also cover two methods for rigging a spring, and how to place it in the armature chain. For specific movements, we'll utilize custom properties and drivers. Finally, we'll make the animation process smoother by using custom bone shapes and applying helpful constraints. Alright, to get started, you can download the practice file for this episode completely free from our pages on ArtStation or Gumroad. The links are in the description, download it and follow along with me. Let's get started. When we get a project from the modeler and open it for the first time, there are a few initial steps we're going to take to get everything organized and ready. We're going to place the bottom of the model at the 000 point, or the world origin, of the coordinate system. To do this, select the mesh and switch to Edit mode. You can then choose your selection type, vertex, edge, or face. I'm choosing vertex and heading to the bottom of the mesh. You have three options to do this. Press Alt and middle click, then drag upwards to reach bottom view. Hold the tilde key to open the orthographic menu and select the viewport you need. Use numbers 1, 3, and 7 for front view, right view, and top view. Holding Control with these numbers will give you the opposite views. Control 1 for back, Control 3 for left, and Control 7 for bottom view. These methods are designed to help you work more efficiently, so use the one you're most comfortable with. Now, we're going to go to bottom view and select those points carefully. Start by selecting one point, then press Alt and select the next point. Ensure the selected points are positioned exactly in the middle of the surface you're aiming for. Press Shift S to bring up the Snap menu, which has different options we'll explore as needed. I'm choosing Cursor to Selected to move the cursor to the center of the selected points. Deselect and switch to Object mode. Press Tab to toggle between the last two modes if you prefer. Press 3 to view the object from the right side. Each object has a yellow dot called the origin when selected, which is the central point around which all transformations and deformations take place. Select all objects and right-click to go to Set Origin. Choose Origin to 3D Cursor, and the origin of all objects will move to the cursor's location. With the cursor at the 0 point, press Shift S and select Cursor to World Origin to move the cursor back to the origin. Finally, choose Selected to Cursor to align all objects with the coordinate axis, so the bottom is positioned at the 0 point. Everything will be nicely aligned. This makes it simpler for the animator to work with the character and return it to its original position. Next, it's very important to set the orientation of the object to face the front view, which is -Y in Blender. This helps ensure that Blender's options work more effectively and reduces potential issues. Let's set this up correctly from the beginning. Right now, our object is facing +Y, so we need to rotate it 180 degrees. With the object selected, press R and then Z to rotate around the Z axis. Type 180 and press Enter. Now, your object should be correctly positioned and oriented in the scene. Go to the Set Origin menu and select Origin to Geometry to reset the origin of all objects to their initial state. Everything should be aligned properly now. Be sure to save your project at the end of each step. I'm going to go to the File menu now and choose Save As to create a new save. This way, you'll have your progress safely stored. The next step is naming, which is very important because it impacts many parts of the project. Both you and others who work on this project after rigging the character need to be able to find objects easily in the collection. Proper naming becomes especially important when using scripts, where even letter case can affect functionality. Here are my general rules for naming that you'll get to know during the course. Every item, from geometry to anything added later, needs a name. Names should be consistent. Each part's name should align with the bones, modifiers, and constraints assigned to it. Choose names that are easy to read and remember. Use logical naming to avoid confusion throughout the project. For spacing between words, I use dot and underscore. You'll learn how to use these as we continue. Let's make sure everything is named correctly. Let's start from the bottom. Select this part and press F2 to type in the name you want. I'm going to name it base_GEO. Next, select the part connecting the bottom and top and name it linkage. Now, let's focus on the top part of the object where most of the movement takes place. Since these components are separate, we need to join parts that will move together to simplify our work. Select all the relevant parts, right-click, and choose Join, or use the shortcut Ctrl-J. Do you understand why this occurred? When you receive a modeled object from the modeler, there might be modifiers left for you to adjust. You can find these in the modifier section, here. Since we don't need to make changes, apply each modifier to each object. You'll notice that other parts have their own specific modifiers active. Applying each individually can be time-consuming, so to save time, select all objects, use Ctrl-A in the Apply menu, and choose Visual Geometry to Mesh. You can also find this option under Object, Apply, then Visual Geometry to Mesh in the top menu. This will finalize all settings for the objects. Now we can join the parts. Select the ones that will move together. To test this, select these two pins first, and use Shift+S from the Snap menu to choose Cursor to Selected to move the cursor here. Then select all parts that should move together, and in the Transform Pivot Point menu, choose 3D Cursor so movements occur around the cursor. Press R for rotation and X to rotate around the X-axis. Observe how the parts move together. Hold Alt and middle click to rotate around the object at once. Press Escape or right-click to return to the original state. To join, right-click and choose Join or use Ctrl-J. Press F2 to rename this part. Forkblock_GEO works well. Repeat for the other parts. Also, these parts will move together. So we choose them and join together. And we call it sidearm_GEO. This part is a fabric and we call it backarm_GEO. Here too, we need to join the separate parts together. And we name it elbow. Top side arm. Top back arm. We join these together. And we name it bridle_GEO. Neck and shade_GEO. This is also a lamp. There are two parts below that need to be named. This is top spring, and this is bottom spring. Everything should be well organized now. We're almost at the exciting stage of placing bones. Rigging or placing bones helps simulate bones or skeletons for creating natural and advanced movements for your object. To start, take a few minutes to look at the object from a suitable distance to see the whole structure. Rotate around it and imagine how it will move. Visualize the main axes and connections in your mind. We'll go through this process step by step together. You can see that this part, called base GEO, is going to control the entire object. Above the base is the linkage, connecting it to the top part of the object. This linkage will rotate around the Z-axis, while the X and Y axes remain fixed, causing the upper parts to follow its rotation. The linkage is also enclosed, which prevents it from moving freely. Movement is constrained within its housing, while it can move along the Z-axis. That's not necessary for now. Above the linkage, there's a pin connecting the fork block and back arm. This pin restricts their movement to rotation around the X-axis. The fork block connects to the side arm, and from here, each component will have limitations on both sides. It's important to understand these connections. When the fork block rotates, the sidearm must also move, or the rotation won't work properly. The movement and rotation of the sidearm are influenced by the fork block's rotation and the spring connecting them. The back arm follows the same rules. The elbow connects both and limits their movement based on its own rotation. For now, focus on understanding the concept and logic behind these movements. You'll be able to create these movements easily with just a few clicks. The back forearm and side forearm connect to the elbow and manage force transfer to the bridle, with a spring regulating this force. At the top, the neck and shade rotate around the X and Z axes respectively. We've reviewed the main movements of the mesh, and now we're ready to start placing bones. Take your time to understand these concepts, and don't hesitate to watch the video again. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I'm here to help. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next episode. Hey there, welcome to the second episode of the Awakening 3D model. In the last episode, we covered the basics you need to know before adding bones. We explored mesh placement and said it should be placed right in the center of the scene. We mentioned that the orientation of the model needs to face the front view, and in Blender, the front view aligns with -y. We talked about the importance of naming things properly. We also started merging parts that move together to make them act as one unit, and we gave each section a name. In the final step, we analyzed the character to understand how it should move. And now, it's time to dive into the exciting part, adding bones. Let's talk a bit about Armature and its essential settings. In Blender, an armature is like a real skeleton. Just like a human skeleton is made of several bones, an armature can have many bones. These bones can move around, and anything connected to them will move and deform along with them. Think of the armature as a special type of object used for rigging. Rigging works like the strings and controls that make a puppet move. Armatures borrow many ideas from real-world skeletons. To get a better idea, let's create an armature. Switch to front view by pressing numpad 1. Then press Shift-A to open the Add menu and select Armature. As you can see, an armature, like any other object in Blender, has an origin, a position, rotation, and scale factor. Each armature works in 3 interaction modes: Object Mode, Edit Mode, and Pose Mode. Edit Mode is where you can adjust individual bones and add new ones if needed. This mode is for setting up the structure of the armature. Object Mode allows you to move the entire armature as one object. Any animation you do in Object Mode affects the whole armature as one unit. Pose Mode is where 2 key actions happen, adding constraints to control how bones move, animating the armature to bring it to life. We can control and move different parts of an object exactly how we want. Since armatures are designed for posing, whether for static scenes or animations, they have a special state called rest position. This is like the default shape of the armature, showing the original position, rotation, and scale of the bone set in edit mode. In edit mode, the armature always stays in the rest position, but in object mode and pose mode, it usually shows the current pose, unless you activate the rest position button in the armature panel. In Blender, there are 5 different types of bones, each with its own unique properties: octahedral, stick, B-bone, envelope, wire. We don't need to understand all of them right now. We'll explore each type as we need them throughout the course. Let's continue our project and learn how to work with the armature and the bones required for this rig. First, open the project. Switch to right view by pressing numpad 3 and we'll start adding bones from the bottom of the model. From the beginning of our rigging process, we'll keep things tidy. As our collections grow more complex, naming and organizing everything correctly will save us from confusion later. Let's create a new collection and name it Luxo Jr. Now, select all the meshes and move them into the Luxo Jr collection. We need a bone to control the base of our model. Select the base, press Shift-S, and choose Cursor to Selected to place the 3D cursor there. Now press Shift-A and select Armature. A new armature has been created with a default octahedral bone. Every new bone we add will now become part of this armature. Let's rename the armature to Luxo Rig. In object mode, press F2 to rename the armature object. To keep things consistent, we'll also rename the armature data to Luxo Rig. It's best to keep our armature in its own collection. Let's create a new collection, name it Luxo Rig, and move the armature into this collection. We created a bone to control the base, so let's go to edit mode to change its name to base. Setting proper names early on keeps things organized. A bone in Blender has 3 main parts: tail, head, and body. In Blender, we refer to all of these as a single bone. The pivot point of a bone is located at the head. Every bone has its own axis that determine its orientation within the armature. It's crucial to ensure that the y-axis runs along the length of the bone. The x and z axes are affected by the bone roll, which we'll explore more in detail later. There are several ways to switch between modes. From the Mode menu, click on the menu at the top left corner to choose between Object, Edit, or Pose mode. Press Tab to enter Edit mode from any other mode. If you're already in Edit mode, pressing Tab will switch you back to previous mode. When you're in Object mode or Pose mode, pressing Control Tab switches between these two modes. If you're in Edit mode, Control Tab brings up a mode selection menu, where you can pick the mode you need. It might feel a bit confusing at first, but don't worry, with practice, you'll get the hang of it, and I just needed to walk you through it once. Let's get familiar with some useful Armature settings. In Armature Object mode, we have the Object tab here. This is the Data tab, here's the Bone tab, and this one is the Constraints tab. Alright, let's go through the necessary settings. We don't need to cover everything right now, just the essential options. In the Object tab, we have Transforms. It gives us location, rotation, and scale. If we press N, we'll see these same options here too. Remember, location and rotation should always be 0, and scale should be 1. This helps make the rigging process smoother. A bit further down, there's Viewport Display, where we can toggle options like showing the name and axis. Here, you can see the armature's name and also the armature's axis, which we don't need. Just make sure location and rotation are 0, and scale is 1. In this same section, we have the In Front option, which lets us see the armature more easily. No matter the view, the armature appears in front of the geometry. You'll find this option in the Armature Data tab as well. It doesn't matter which tab you activate it from. Let's go back to the Object tab. Here, we have Display As set to Textured by default. We'll change it to Wire. In this mode, the armature appears as an outline. If one bone is inside another, you'll be able to see it clearly. If we switch to Edit mode or Pose mode, we can see how useful this setting is. In the Data tab, the settings we need to know for starting are in Viewport Display. Under Display As, we can change the type of bone, which is always an option. We can also enable Name, which might be helpful. Next is the Axes option, which shows the bone axis. This is important. You can adjust its position here too. Now, since we enabled Wire in the Object tab, let's go to the Bone Properties tab and select a color for the bones in Viewport. Bone Color sets the bone color in Edit mode. Pose Bone Color sets the bone color in Pose mode. These settings help us stay aware of which mode we're in. Let's see how it looks. If we go to Edit mode, we'll see that the bone has turned the selected color, and because of Wire mode, it's transparent. And in Pose mode, we'll see the same changes, but in blue. Remember, you might need to apply these settings for any new bones as you continue with the process. Alright, let's dive into bone placement and continue building the rig step by step. We've already created a bone and named it Base. Now switch to Edit mode to modify it. Select the bone and rotate it -90 degrees on the x-axis. Move it slightly downward so it's positioned roughly in the center. Scale it up a bit. Looks good for now. Next, let's create a linkage bone. Click where you want to start. Press E to extrude, then Z to constrain the movement along the Z-axis. Move the mouse upward to create the new bone. This looks good. You can also extrude bones through the menu. Select the Extrude option, then click anywhere to create a new bone. Use X, Y, or Z keys while extruding to snap the bone's movement along those axes. You might notice the tail of the bone isn't aligned with the pin. It needs to be in the same spot for the rig to function properly. Since the bone is positioned vertically, we don't need to move it. Instead, we'll adjust the pin. Switch to Object mode and select the relevant part. Use Tab to enter Edit mode. Select a point on both sides of the pin to ensure they're aligned in the middle. Press Shift-S, cursor to selected to move the cursor there. Go back to Object mode and select the upper sections. Make sure the linkage isn't selected. Right-click, Set Origin, Origin to 3D Cursor. Switch back to Armature's Edit mode. Select the tail of the bone, press Shift-S, cursor to selected to align it. Go back to Object mode, select the upper part again, and press Shift-S, selected to cursor. Perfect. Now let's keep going with the rest of the bones. Switch back to Edit mode, select the bone, press F2, and rename it to Linkage. Click again, press E to extrude, and move it to the next position. Repeat the extrusion process as needed to build the structure. Keep in mind, the bone positions don't have to be perfect for now. We'll refine them later. Since this is a hard surface object, each section will get its own bone to control it, as no part will bend or flex. We added this bone to control the elbow. Next, for the back arm, we just need to create a bone from this point to this point. To do that, press Shift A to add a bone and move it to this spot. Move its tail near this point. Important note, if we create a bone in edit mode using Shift A, it becomes a part of the same armature we are already working on. But if we press Shift A in object mode and select armature, it creates a new armature. Alright, let's continue by selecting this section. Press E and extend it to here. Now for the neck, we add another bone using Shift plus A and move it to this point. We'll add one more bone along this line to control the shade and lamp. Now, it's time to name the bones and move them to the right positions. The head of each bone needs to be exactly at the point where the transforms will happen. Let's start from the bottom. To make things easier, I'll temporarily turn off axes in the object data panel. The base and linkage are already in the correct places. Let's rename this part to fork block. Since this bone was extruded from the linkage's tail, it's already in the right point. Now, let's move to the next part. We'll call this one sidearm, since it's going to control the entire section. The head of this bone needs to be at the center of this axis. To do that, go to Object Mode and select Sidearm. Now, switch to Edit Mode and select one point from this section, then press Ctrl L. Now press Shift S and choose Cursor to Selected. Go back to Armature's Edit Mode, select this part, press Shift S, and choose Selected to Cursor. We'll do the same thing for the upper part. Rename it to Top Sidearm. To find the center of this part, we just need to locate the middle between these two pins. Go to Object Mode and select Top Sidearm. Now select one point from each pin. Press Ctrl L to select all connected points. Then, Cursor to Selected. Switch to Armature's Edit Mode, select the part, press Shift S, and choose Selected to Cursor. Repeat this process for the rest of the parts. To place the shade correctly, we need to make sure the neck bone stays aligned with its axis. Select these points, move the cursor to this section, and manually move the bone to the point, only moving along the Z-axis. I'm gonna zoom in to make sure it's as precise as possible. Alright, the bones are created, named, and placed correctly. In the next part, we're gonna explore how the bone connection, talk about bone roll, and learn about the different types of bones in Blender. Thanks for staying with me. See you in the next episode. Hello everyone, welcome to the third episode of the Awakening 3D model. In the last episode, we started with the basics of creating an armature in Blender. We learned about different armature interaction modes, object mode, edit mode, and pose mode. We also discussed the importance of the armature's origin, location, rotation, and scale. Then, we moved on to organizing our rigging process, including how to name and categorize collections for better management. We also covered bone structure in Blender, explaining the three main parts of a bone: the head, tail, and body. In terms of armature settings, we went through the Object tab and Viewport display settings to make the rigging process easier, focusing on keeping things organized and clear. We also explored customizing bone colors and adjusting the bone display in different modes to help with visibility. Finally, we started the process of bone placement. We created and renamed bones to control different parts of the character. We also learned how to extrude bones and ensure their heads are positioned correctly to handle transformations. And now, in this part, we're going to explore bone connections. We're also going to learn about the importance of bone roll and how to adjust it. And finally, we'll explore the different types of bones. Bone connections are one of the most important parts of rigging. These connections directly affect how our character moves. Let's take the first step. Keep in mind that this should be done in edit mode. The color coding we've set up can help us focus and avoid mistakes. As we know, this bone is responsible for controlling all the other bones. So, by moving the base, all the bones should move along with it. In other words, we can consider the base as the start of the bone chain. The linkage is the connection between the base and the other joints we've created so far. Okay, let's get started. Any bone you create using extrude is automatically going to be the child of the previous bone. Above linkage, there are two paths. We created both of these paths with extrude. So, back arm is the child of linkage, and elbow is the child of back arm. Similarly, fork block is a child of linkage, side arm is a child of fork block, and top side arm is a child of side arm. Now we reach top back arm, which wasn't created with extrude. Since the top back arm controls the back part of the character, we'll make it a child of the elbow. Just select top back arm first, then elbow. Now, press Ctrl P and a window will pop up. It gives us two options. Both options perform the parent-child operation, but with one difference. If you choose Keep Offset, the top back arm is going to stay in its current position and become the child of the elbow. But, if you choose Connect, as you can see, the head of top back arm is going to snap to the tail of the elbow. This option can be very useful, but here, we'll use Keep Offset because we want the bone to stay in place. From now on, it'll follow the elbow. To see the connections, go to the Overlays panel and enable Relationship Lines. As you can see, the connections are shown with dashed lines. To test, let's switch to Pose mode. We'll see that when we move the base, all the bones connected to it move too. Also, when we move the elbow, the top side arm moves with it. If, in a project, you've placed bones like this and later decide to add a joint in between, just hold Shift, select both bones, and press F. You can also find this option in the Armature panel under Fill Between Joints. If needed, you can select Subdivide here and use this panel to add more bones. Now, pay attention to this point. When we use Fill, the newly added joint will only be a child of the previous joint. But if you want it to be fully part of the chain, you need to select both bones, press Ctrl P, and choose either Keep Offset or Connect. Right-clicking also gives us access to other common tools. As you can see, Subdivide, Duplicate, Extrude, Fill, and Parent are available here. There are also other tools here that we'll explore later if needed. Now, we move on to Shade, which is not in the chain. This is because the neck-like top sidearm was created separately. I'll also make the neck a child of bridle, as it needs to follow it. First, select neck, then bridle. Press Ctrl plus P and choose Keep Offset. Keep in mind, we can always change these connections later. Now, all our joints are connected and will move according to the plan we have in mind. The next step is adjusting the bone roll. To see it, we can go to the Data properties and enable Axis. You'll see that each bone has its own axis, which affects its location and rotation. To understand bone roll better, let's test it out. Let's go to Pose mode for testing. For example, look at the axis of back arm and elbow. The y-axis of both joints points toward the opposite side of the joint, but their z and x-axis are different. Pay attention to their x-axis. In back arm, the x-axis points to the positive global x-axis, and in elbow, it points the opposite way. Let's rotate the back arm around the x-axis a bit in the negative direction, and do the same with the elbow. You'll see that they move exactly opposite of each other because their x-axes are not aligned. To fix this, we just need to align the two axes. The y and x-axis should be our reference. The y-axis should always follow the main direction of the bone, and the x-axis should be perpendicular to it and point to the positive x-axis in the global coordinate system. This way, the z-axis will automatically adjust. There are 3 ways to adjust the bone roll. Go to Edit mode, select the bone, and click the option to adjust its roll. Alternatively, select the bone and press Ctrl R to adjust the roll. The third method, which I prefer for characters like this that follow a fixed principle, is to go to the Armature tab, then Bone Roll, and select Recalculate Roll. You can also access this with the shortcut Shift-N. Here you'll get some options that you can try to find the right one for your needs. One useful option here is Active Bone. If you've already adjusted the roll of one bone and want to adjust the others based on it, hold Shift, select the first bone, and then select the next bone. This will apply the roll adjustment to the other bones. You'll see that the roll is adjusted easily based on the active bone we've selected. As you can see, the roll of all the bones is now aligned in the correct direction. In Blender, there are 5 different types of bones that we can use depending on the task at hand, and we can convert between them as needed. Octahedral bone. This is the default bone type that appears when you create an armature. It's considered a standard bone. If you need to change it, simply go to the Data Properties tab, then under Viewport Display, you can change it in the Display As section. One of the positive aspects of the octahedral bone is that, by looking at it, you can easily tell which direction your chain is pointing. Due to its octagonal shape, its rotation is easily visible, making it very practical. Stick bone. This bone type has fewer visual indicators and a very minimalistic appearance. However, you can still see which direction it points, because, except for the root of the chain, each child has only one point, which is the tip. But unlike the octahedral bone, you cannot easily tell the rotation direction just by looking at it. Wire bone. This is even more minimal than the stick bone. The only thing you can see about this bone is its length. There are no visible indicators of its rotation or direction. It's a very stripped down bone type, useful for specific cases where rotation and direction aren't crucial for visualization. Envelope bone. We have the envelope bone, but for now, we don't need to focus on this. It's not something we need to engage with at this stage. B-bone or bendy bone. This is a highly useful bone type with many practical advantages. One of its key features is the ability to subdivide it. To do this, go to the Bone menu, open Bendy Bone, and you'll see this amazing feature. When I rotate the bone, you can see it forms a nice curve. This feature is extremely useful for creating cables, ropes, and other flexible objects. It also helps reduce the number of bones you need for rigging certain flexible objects. Another advantage of the B-bone is its scaling capability. You can scale it normally with S, and to scale it along its width, you can press Ctrl-Alt-Shift-S. If you want 2 bones at the same point, oriented in the same direction, the B-bone makes it easy to achieve and control. For example, I can duplicate this bone, modify one of them, and distinguish it from the other, making it easier to select. These different bone types offer various advantages depending on what you're trying to accomplish in your rigging work. Each type can be useful for different kinds of characters or objects you might be working with. Thank you for joining me in this section. Don't forget, to truly learn, we must practice, practice, and practice. So please open the project and apply what we've learned in this episode. Feel free to leave your comments and suggestions below. I'm here to answer all your questions. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next episode. Hi friends! Welcome to the 4th episode of the Awakening 3D Models. In the last episode, we worked on bone connections, learned about bone roll, and talked about its importance. We also got to know the different types of bones. I'm so happy you're here with me in this episode. Let's continue with the Luxo Jr rigging. Before we start, don't forget you can download the practice file for this episode completely free from our pages on ArtStation and Gumroad. Okay, now it's time to look at the type of movement and create commands that will make the character move the way it should. In the first episode, we fully explored the character's movement. If you don't remember it well, I recommend watching the first episode again from minute 9 onward. Let's get started. I press 3 and go to the side view. Keep in mind that this part of the work should be done in pose mode. So, let's start from the bottom again. The base is responsible for moving the entire character, and as you can see, it does this well. By rotating the linkage, the whole top part of the character should rotate as well. I press R and test it. As you can see, it rotates well around the local X and Y axes. Pay attention, around the local X and Y axes, not the global X and Y axes. This is because the bones of the character move based on their own local axes. If I set the transform mode to global, we see that when rotating around the Z axis, the character rotates correctly. But if we look at the transform window, we can see that the rotation is applied to the Y axis. This data is more important because the animator will use it for animation. So, it's better to set the transform mode to local, so we can see everything as the animator will see it. Now, above the linkage, we have two bone paths that meet at this point. This means that the movement of one will affect the other, but as we can see, they are currently moving separately. To solve this problem, we use a feature called constraint. A constraint in Blender is a tool that lets you control the behavior of objects, bones, or rigs by limiting their movement, rotation, or scaling. Constraints automate interactions between elements, making it easier to achieve specific effects or behaviors in your rig. In Blender, there are two types of constraints: object constraints and bone constraints, which you can access from these two tabs. Right now, we only need the bone constraint. If we click on Add Bone Constraint, we will see several options, each implementing specific commands. The constraint we need, which will be used in this character, is called Inverse Kinematics, or IK for short. Inverse kinematics is a rigging method used to control the position and rotation of bones in a chain. With IK, you manipulate the target bone, and Blender calculates how the other bones in the chain should move to achieve the desired position. This is particularly useful for animating limbs, as it allows for more natural and intuitive control. So in the first step, we want to make it so that when we move the top sidearm, the sidearm and fork block move with it. To do this, we select the top sidearm and apply inverse kinematics in the bone constraint section. We change the name to IK top sidearm. As you can see, it gives us several settings. We have a target, which should be of type object, and if we click here, it shows us selectable options. The object we are working with is the Luxo rig. Using this dropper, we can also pick the object from the scene. Just click on one of the bones to select the Luxo rig. Yeah, another option has been added. The bone option asks us to choose a bone that will control our IK. So, which bone should we choose? Obviously, our IK should be controlled from this point, but we don't have a controlling bone here. What we need to do is go into edit mode and create a bone at this point. I press tab, go into edit mode, click here, and use E to create a bone along the Y-axis with F2, naming it CTRL top sidearm. One thing to note here is that this newly created controller should not be a child of the top sidearm. So we select it, press Alt-P, and choose Clear Parent to separate them. I press Tab and go back to pose mode, select the top sidearm, and in the bone constraint section, we assign CTRL top sidearm as its control. I also changed the color of the new bone to blue in the bone properties, so it matches the others in pose mode. What do you think about choosing a different color to make it stand out from the rest? Great! Now, I want to test our IK and see the result. I select the controller and move it with G. See, this is not the movement we were looking for, but don't worry, select the top sidearm, and in the IK settings, there's an option to fix this issue. Chain length. In this section, we can define how far along the bone chain the IK will affect. If this number is set to 0, as shown by the dashed line here, it will connect to the beginning of the chain. So, when we move the controller, the entire character moves with it. I want the top sidearm, and fork block to be affected. We just need to change this number to 3, and now we see that the dashed line has moved from this part to this part. Let's see the result in action. When I select the controller and move it with G, we can see that these bones are wonderfully affected. It can't get better than this. It's really exciting when we get closer to the final result. Now, let's move on to the elbow. The elbow, just like the top sidearm, will affect its previous bone when it moves. So, for the elbow, we also create an inverse kinematics constraint from the bone constraints section and name it IK elbow. We select the Luxo rig as the target using the dropper. For the bone, we can use the top sidearm since it's right here and isn't a parent or child of the elbow. This will make the elbow move when the top sidearm moves, exactly what we want. So, I select top sidearm from the list here. We want both the elbow and back arm to be affected, so we enter the number 2 here. Let's see what happens. I select the top sidearm controller and see that when I move it, the elbow and back arm move beautifully. Notice that during their movement, the bridle and top back arm don't move correctly. This problem can be easily solved. We just need to create an IK for the bridle as well. We select the bridle and apply inverse kinematics to it. We name it IK bridle. We select the Luxo rig as the target. And for the bone, what should we do? We can use top sidearm controller, so I select top sidearm controller from this window. If I select and move top sidearm controller, we see that the bones interact perfectly and follow each other. As you can see, all the IKs we created are now controlled by this controller. So I press F2 and rename it to IKCTRL. It's better. Great. Now let's test our rig. If I grab the base and move it, we see that, contrary to what we expected, not all the bones move correctly. This is because this controller isn't following the base. To fix this, we need to make the controller a child of the base. So I go into edit mode, select the controller, and while holding shift, select the base. I press Ctrl P and choose keep offset. I go back to pose mode, select the base, and move it. Now we see that everything follows the base correctly. I also check the rotation, and we see that it rotates correctly along all axes. Let's go to the linkage. The linkage isn't supposed to move, it's only supposed to rotate according to our plan. So, I press R and test the rotation. Why did this happen? Any idea what's causing this problem? It's all because of the controller. Since we made the controller a child of the base, it only follows the base. We just need to make it a child of the linkage, and now it will follow both the linkage and the base, since the linkage is a child of the base. So, I go into edit mode, select the controller, and while holding shift, select the linkage. I press Ctrl P and choose keep offset. I go back to pose mode, select the linkage, and rotate it around its axis with R. Now we see that everything follows it correctly. The linkage tail is on a pin, and we know that the top part of the character should rotate around the x-axis with this pin. How can we make this happen? Right now, if we want to rotate the top part of the character around the x-axis, the only way is to rotate the linkage. As you can see, rotating it doesn't work correctly. What should we do to make the rotation happen from this point? We just need to go into edit mode and add a new bone at this point. I select the linkage and create a bone along the z-axis with E. I press F2 and name it top linkage. While holding shift, I select IK controller, fork block, back arm, and finally top linkage and press Ctrl P, then keep offset. What do you think if we just delete the linkage? Because this new bone we created rotates the top part both around the X and Y axes. I select the linkage, press X, and delete the bone. I also rename this to linkage. We should always try to optimize our rig as much as possible. Now let's go into pose mode and test it. No problem, just check the transform of each one, and if it's changed, set it back to 0. Now everything is in order. Let's check again from the bottom. The base is controlling all the bones correctly. The linkage is rotating the character correctly around the X and Y axes. I also select the IK controller to make sure everything is working great. Excellent! Now, let's go into edit mode and select each bone to make sure the roll data is set to 0. We'll continue until all the bones are set to 0. This step is necessary to prevent inaccurate bone movement and rotation. Now, I reset this, and you can see that the roll has changed and looks correct. It's best that the Z-axis of this controller is aligned with the base, to avoid problems for the animator. We'll do the same here, resetting it to 0 for the same reason. Great, now everything is ready for the next step. The next step is to add a pole target. A pole target is used in an IK setup to control the direction or bend of a bone chain. For example, in a character rig, a pole target can make sure the elbow or knee bends the right way. It's usually a separate object or bone that controls the IK chain's rotation. Let's do it. First, I'm going to hide the mesh here temporarily so we can see what's happening better. To create a pole target, I'm going to extrude a new bone along the Y-axis from this point. I select it, press Alt-P, and choose Clear Parent. Then, I move it to this position. Press F2 and name it Pole Target. I go to Pose Mode, select the elbow, and in the Bone Constraints, in the IK Elbow settings, we can see the Pole Target option. This option is also an object type. I use the eyedropper tool to select the object and link the pole target to it in the bone settings. Let's see what changes. To fix this issue, I just need to change the pole angle to -90. Usually, setting it to either +90 or -90 fixes the problem. When I move the pole target, I see it doesn't fully affect the object. I just need to link this pole target to the IK top sidearm as well. Luxo rig. Pole target. Set it to -90 here. Let's test it. Great! It works correctly. I also change its color to orange in the bone settings. Our work in this step isn't done yet. If I move the IK controller, I see it works correctly, as long as it doesn't go too low. And if I move the pole target a bit lower, it will work. To fix this, I need to find a way to keep the pole target in the right position when the character's skeleton changes. For this, I can use a constraint called Copy Transforms to set it up. The Copy Transforms constraint makes one object or bone copy the exact location, rotation, and scale of another. It's useful to make sure different parts of a rig align correctly or to sync the motion of bones or objects. Let's do the same thing here. We'll place one bone here, and one in the middle of these two. Finally, we'll make the pole target a child of the middle bone. Great. Now, let's go to edit mode. From here, we create a bone pointing down. Press E, and then Z. And done. Now I'll duplicate it and snap it to the base. To snap it, select this part, press Shift S, and choose Cursor to Selected. Then, select this and press Shift S and choose Selected to Cursor. Now I'll duplicate it again and move it roughly here. After applying Copy Transforms, it will be in the right position. Let's name this one Top PT Controller. Name this one Mid PT Controller. And this one Bottom PT Controller. We want the middle bone to always be between the other two bones. So, let's go to Pose Mode, select it, and in the Bone Constraints, create a Copy Transforms constraint. Select Luxo Rig as the target. Then, select Top PT Controller as the bone. As expected, it snaps to it immediately. Now, I'll duplicate this constraint. And in the Bone section, select Bottom PT Controller. See? Now it's attached to the bottom bone. Since constraints are applied from bottom to top, the one lower down takes priority. We just need to set the influence to 0.5. This means it will allow the top constraint to work at 50%. Let's name this Top PT Controller Copy Transforms. And this one, Bottom PT Controller Copy Transforms. Great. Now, if I grab the IK controller and move it, I see they all move together, but it's not exactly what we wanted. This is because, since I extruded from here and duplicated it, they're all children of top sidearm and follow it. Let's go to edit mode, select all three while holding Shift, and then choose linkage. Press Ctrl P and choose Keep Offset. Let's check by going to pose mode and moving the IK controller again. Now, we see nothing happens because they are all children of linkage and follow it. We need to make sure that when we move IK controller, Top PT controller moves with it. To solve this, let's use another constraint. Select Top PT controller and add a copy location constraint. First, select Luxo Rig, then IK controller as the bone. Now, when we move IK controller, we get the result we wanted. But it seems we forgot to change the chain length to 2 in the IK bridle settings. This is because when I move the controller, the base also gets affected. So I'll select bridle and change the chain length to 2 in the IK settings. Let's go to edit mode and make pole target a child of mid PT controller so it follows it. Now, let's go back to pose mode to test. As expected, the pole target moves correctly, but in some situations, like this one, our rig breaks because the pole target isn't positioned correctly relative to the IK. We need to make sure that when we move the IK, the pole target keeps its angle with the IK. To fix this, let's use a new constraint for mid PT controller. I'll select mid PT controller and find the damped track constraint. The damped track constraint makes an object or bone face a target, while keeping smooth and natural movement. So here, I'll set Luxo Rig as the target and bottom PT controller as the bone. As you can see, this makes the Y-axis of mid PT controller always point to bottom PT controller. Naturally, The pole target, which is a child of mid-PT controller, follows it and rotates around mid-PT controller based on its rotation. Great. We can see that the pole target problem is beautifully solved, and we've overcome the challenges one by one. Also, as the last point in this episode, to reset the pole target and IK to their original positions, you can use Alt-G. Let's wrap up here. After watching the video, make sure to try out what we've covered today. Remember, learning stays in your mind only through practice. Thank you for joining me today. I'll see you in the next episode as we continue this journey together. Hello friends, you're watching the 5th episode of the free course series, Awakening 3D Models. In the last episode, we added IK to our rig and saw how amazing it is. Then, we added a pole target to make its movement even better. We also learned about copy transforms, copy location, and damped track. In this episode, we're going to organize the bones, learn about custom bone shapes, and implement them. You can find the free practice file for today's lesson on ArtStation and Gumroad. Don't miss it. Alright, let's continue. One of the main responsibilities of a rigging artist is to simplify and clarify the rig for animators to use. At this stage, we're going to organize the bones into collections to make the workspace less cluttered. To do this, go to the Data tab and look for the Bone Collection section. You'll see there's already a collection called Bones. Next to each collection, there are two options. The eye icon controls visibility. The star icon makes a collection solo, hiding everything else. As you can see, the Bones collection includes all the bones. You can double-click on the collection's name to rename it. I'm going to rename this one to All Bones. You can also use the plus and minus buttons to add or remove collections. Let's add a new collection and name it Controllers. This means I'm going to include all the bones that are used to control the character in this collection. I'll select the base, linkage, IK controller, pole target, neck, and shade. Then, click Assign to add them to the controller's collection. To remove a bone from a collection, select it, click Remove, and it'll be taken out of the collection. Using the two buttons, you can select or deselect all bones in a collection. Now, I'll turn off all bones and continue. Next, let's talk about custom bone shapes. You can find the settings for this in the Bone tab, under Viewport Display and Custom Shape. Make sure you're in pose mode for this step. Custom bone shape allows you to change the appearance of bones used to control the rig. A custom shape is actually another object that replaces the bone's visual representation. Let's create the first shape for the base. Switch to Object Mode, press Ctrl A, and from the Curve menu, create a circle. Hold Ctrl and move it to this area. Go to Edit Mode, right-click, and select Subdivide to increase the number of points as needed. Select the points, press P, and choose Separate. Delete the segment, then extrude this point. Select these 2 points, right-click, and set the handle type to Vector. Extrude again to this point. Do the same for the other side. I recommend holding Ctrl to have precise shape. You can also press V for a quicker way to access this menu. To connect 2 points, simply press F to fill the gap. Now, select these points, separate them, and delete them. Press Shift D to duplicate the shape, then press R, Z, and type 90 to rotate it. Select them and press Ctrl J to join. Duplicate it again and rotate it 180 degrees around the Z-axis. Select everything and press Ctrl J to join. For any unconnected points, select them, press F, then press X, and delete the vertices. Great! We've created the first shape. Now rename it and use the prefix CS to indicate it's a custom shape. Switch to Pose mode, select the base, and in the Custom Shape section, use the eyedropper to pick the shape we just created. Excellent! As you can see, the appearance of the bone has changed to match the custom shape. In this section, useful settings specific to the shape are now available. These don't affect the bone's data but can be adjusted as needed. I'll set the scale to 2 and adjust it slightly downward along the Z-axis. Alright, that's done. Now it's time to work on the linkage. The linkage is going to rotate around the X and Y axes. so we need to create a shape that represents this movement. From the Add menu, create a Bezier curve. Go to Edit mode. Change the handle type to vector. Select these two handle points and drag them in this direction to create a curve. Select all the points, duplicate it, and move it higher. Use the Curve Pen tool to draw an arrow in the desired area. Just click on the desired point to start drawing from that point. I'm going to select the Move tool, choose these 2 points, and press F to connect them. Now I select these points, duplicate them, and press B to activate Set Snap Base. In this mode, simply select one point as the base. Then, when I move near any point, it's going to snap to it. Switch to Object Mode and duplicate the entire shape and rotate it 90 degrees around the Y-axis. And press Ctrl J to join. Finally, rename it as CS Linkage. For the pole target, I'm going to create a cube. Create a Bezier curve and change the handle type of the points to vector. Duplicate it and move it here. Select these points and press F to fill them. Do the same for these points. Switch to Right View. Duplicate all the points and move them here. Duplicate them again and rotate them around the X-axis. And move them here. Duplicate them again. Move them to this position. Okay, perfect. Rename it as CS Pole Target. Alright, let's move on to the IK controller. Which axis can the IK controller move along? As you can see, it clearly moves along the Z and Y axes. But when it moves along the X axis, the linkage comes out of the pin. Now, I want to add a cool feature to the rig. As you know, we can combine constraints to create new behaviors. Right now, if the IK controller moves along the X axis, the bone goes out of place. But I want to set up a system to prevent this issue and add a new feature. We just need to make the linkage rotate around Y when the IK controller moves, so the rig doesn't deform. The idea is simple. When the IK controller's angle changes, the linkage should rotate to follow it. Select Linkage and add a Lock Track constraint from the menu. Set the target to Luxo Rig, and for the bone, select IK Controller. In the track axis, choose the axis pointing toward the target, in this case, Z. For lock axis, select the axis in the middle of the bone, which is Y. Let's test it. The linkage rotates, but it's too fast and hard to control. Why do you think it didn't work perfectly? I press Alt-G to reset the bones to their default positions. Sometimes this doesn't work correctly. This usually happens when you're using constraints. In this case, just disable and re-enable the constraint. The issue is that we tried to make the linkage follow the IK controller, but the IK controller is a child of the linkage, so it should follow the linkage instead. This can be solved with coding, but there's an easier solution. Switch to Edit mode and recreate the bone we had earlier. Select these 2 points and press F to fill them. As mentioned before, this newly created bone is a child of the base, but it has no connection to the linkage. So, make the linkage its child. Rename it to Root. Make the IK controller its child as well, so it no longer depends on the linkage. Now, go to Pose mode for testing. As you can see, it works beautifully. Instead of coming out of the pin, it rotates. Change the color of the root to match the other joints. We're no longer going to use the linkage for rotation. Instead, we're going to use the root. So, remove the linkage from this collection and assign the root to both collections. For the IK controller's custom shape, use the same shape as before. Duplicate it and rotate it 180 degrees around the Z axis. Rename it as CSIK. Alright, we need to create a shape for the root as well. I'll start by creating a circle. Press Tab to go to Edit mode, use Subdivide to add more points. Select these points and press P to separate them. Switch to object mode with tab and delete the separated part. Switch back to edit mode, extrude this point to create an arrow. Hold Ctrl to snap it into place. I changed the handle type to vector. Do the same for the other side. Connect the 2 points using F. I also changed the handle type of these to vector. Select these points, and at the end, click this point to make it the active element. Since the transform pivot point is set to active element, the rotation will occur around this point. Rotate these points 90 degrees around the x-axis. Do the same for the other side, selecting these points and separating them with P. Switch to object mode and delete the separated part. Switch back to edit mode. Select these points and duplicate them. Press B, and using Set Snap Base, set this point as the base and snap it to the other side. In this part of the curve, we can create an arrow showing rotation around the bone's local y-axis. As before, separate these points and delete them. Extrude these points like this. Select the points and press V, then change the handle type to vector. Continue extruding from here and connect the 2 points with F. Separate these points, go to object mode, and delete them. Go back to edit mode, select those points, duplicate them, and by using B and setting this point as the base, we'll have the same shape on the other side. I also call it CS root. Great! Now the only shapes left to create are for the neck and shade. The neck should rotate around local X, and the shade should rotate around local Z. For both, I'll create one shape that handles their rotations. Create a circle curve. Switch to edit mode, duplicate them, and rotate them 90 degrees around X. Rename it as CS neck. Perfect. All the shapes are ready. Now let's apply them to the bones. Select the root, and in the bone properties, assign the shape we just created. It's because the axes are not aligned. You can fix this from this section. Select the pole target and assign the cube shape to it. Adjust the scale slightly and tweak the location as well. Great. Assign the IK shape as well. Adjust the scale and position a bit. Looks good now. Follow the same process for the neck. For now, we don't need the shade, so I'll remove it from the controller's collection. Excellent. All the shapes have been applied, and as you can see, the rig looks much cleaner now. If you want, you can go to the Data tab, and under the Geometry section, add a bit of depth to the curves to improve their appearance. Looks good now. To keep the outline more organized, select the Luxo rig, create a new collection, and move all the custom shapes into it. Hide the collection to make the viewport less cluttered. These are all the controllers the animator is going to use to bring the character to life. Here we have 3 types of controllers. FK controller. This includes the base, root, and neck. As you know, with FK, you can manually move each bone. When you move a parent bone, all its child bones move along with it. IK controller. This controller allows us to move multiple connected bones by moving a single bone. The software calculates the motion for the other bones based on the settings we've applied. Pole target. This controller lets us adjust the elbow position of the character and change the direction of the IK. Alright, that's a wrap for this episode on Blender rigging. I hope you found it helpful. If you run into any issues or have questions, join our Discord page and let's talk it out. I'll catch you next time. Hey everyone! Welcome to episode 6 of the Awakening 3D Models. Let's take a quick look at what we covered last episode. In the previous episode, we explored bone collections and organized bones into separate collections to keep our scene cleaner. Then we moved on to custom bone shapes and went over how to create controllers in the process. We also added a new constraint to the linkage, bringing a new feature to our rig. Now, in this episode, we're going to dive into two super useful and powerful tools: custom properties and drivers. Don't forget to download the practice files for this episode from Gumroad or ArtStation, and make sure to practice. If you're ready, let's get started. Let's start with custom properties. What? You don't know what custom properties are? Well, I didn't know at first either. Let's do it together and get familiar with it. The custom property is an extra control to make the rig more flexible and easier to use. You can find custom properties in 3 different places in Blender. First, if you go to the Object Properties panel, you'll see a section for custom properties. These properties are useful when you want to control object-level settings, like visibility, transformations, or other custom behaviors that apply to the entire object. The second place you'll find them is in the Object Data Properties panel. These are great when you need multiple objects to share the same property settings. For example, changing a property on the mesh data affects all objects using that mesh, keeping everything consistent. And the third place where custom properties appear is in the Bone Properties panel, which is exactly what we're going to use in this lesson. In rigging, custom properties are super useful for controlling bone behaviors, like switching between IK and FK, setting up constraints, or adding pose-related controls. Alright, to start, I'm going to click on Neck, and then click on New to create a new property for it. Please note that I created this custom property in Pose mode. Yes, it's really important in which mode you create a custom property, but don't worry about that for now. Just remember to create it in Pose mode. As you can see, when we add a new custom property, a new tab appears here, and that's where our property is stored. By default, it comes with some basic settings, but we need to adjust it to fit our needs. You can remove it by clicking the X, or open its full settings by clicking the gear icon, which gives us complete control over customization. The first thing we need to set is the type of our property. The type defines what kind of data this property is going to hold. Choosing the right type makes sure everything works smoothly in our workflow. From this list, we can use either float or integer. The difference? Float allows decimal numbers, while integer only works with whole numbers. You can pick whichever suits your needs, but for our case, float is the right choice. Float can store decimal values, which makes it perfect for precise controls like movement, rotation, weight, and more. Now let's enter a name for our property. I want to use this property to control the neck rotation around the x-axis. So I'm going to name it neck_x rotation. Next, we have the default value. The default value is the starting number assigned to this property. If you ever want to reset a property to its default, just hover over it and press backspace. Choosing the right default value is super important. For example, if you're controlling scale, never set the default to 0, because that can mess things up, as you can see. But since we're controlling neck rotation, setting the default to 0 is perfect. It keeps everything in its default position. Below the default value, you see 2 fields for min and max, which are also called the hard limit. These set the absolute boundaries for a property. The numbers you enter here mean that any value outside this range isn't accepted. I want to draw your attention to an important point in Blender. Angle changes and rotations are measured in radians. That means you can't use degrees here. We can't use -180 for minimum and +180 for maximum. Instead, we need to use their equivalents in radians. Let's stick with these basics for now, and we're going to cover more advanced details later. For now, just know that 180 degrees equals 3.14 radians. So set minimum to -3.14 and maximum to +3.14. After minimum and maximum, you see the soft limit. If I turn this on, I can set another range for the property. The soft limit creates a smaller range inside the hard limit. Basically, it lets us define a preferred range for the animator. So, we have two types of limits: hard limit and soft limit. The hard limit restricts all values to a set range, and the soft limit narrows that range further, giving us a recommended range for our custom property. Alright, I'll turn this off for now. Next, we have the step setting. Step determines how much the property's value changes each time you adjust it. It's especially useful when working with sliders, helping to control precision. For example, if I set the step to 5, each adjustment moves by 0.05. If I set it to 500, it moves by 5. With that in mind, setting it to 5 seems like a good choice. Next up is precision. This controls how many decimal places are displayed in the interface. It helps you decide how finely a property can be adjusted and displayed. Now let's talk about subtype. This option only appears if you're using a float or float array. Subtype lets you define the specific category of the property, which helps fine-tune how it behaves and looks in the user interface. But here's something important. Make sure the unit of your subtype matches what you're controlling. Otherwise, things might not work as expected. Since we're controlling neck rotation, we need to match its unit with the rotation unit in the transform menu. But as you can see, this property isn't set to degrees by default. So I'm going to open the rotation mode menu and choose one of the Euler modes. I won't go into too much detail here. Just look at which axis isn't really used in the rotation and pick a mode where that axis is in the middle. For the neck, we don't need to rotate around the z-axis, so I'm choosing XZY Euler mode. Now back to our property settings. And you see, the settings are back to default. That's because if you click outside this window, it closes. And since we didn't click OK, the changes weren't saved. I'll enter the previous settings again. Okay, since we've set everything up for rotation in degrees, I'm going to select angle as the subtype. In the description field, you can write notes about this property. This can be really useful when working with it later. Alright, we've successfully created our first custom property. I'm going to click OK to apply the changes. The reason this number changed to 57.3 is that before setting angle as the subtype, the value was in radians, and now it's converted to degrees. I just need to hover over it and press backspace to reset it to the default value. But we're not done yet. As you can see, changing its value doesn't actually do anything. That's because we haven't connected it to anything yet. In other words, we need to tell Blender to use this property to control the X rotation. And this is where drivers come in. Drivers are a powerful tool that let you create dynamic relationships between different properties. Basically, a driver takes the value from one property and uses it to control another, allowing for complex automated behaviors without manually keyframing everything. To add a driver to any property, just hover over it and press Ctrl D or right-click and select Add Driver. Either way, this window will pop up. Now be careful. If you move your mouse outside this window, it'll close. And if you press Ctrl D again to reopen it, you'll accidentally add a new variable to the driver. Instead, just right-click the property and select Edit Driver to reopen the settings. If you ever need to remove a driver, right-click the property and choose Delete Single Driver. Be careful. If you select Delete Drivers, it'll remove all drivers in the rotation section. The same applies to location and scale properties, so make sure you're deleting only what you need. Now let's change our workspace a bit for easier access to the drivers. Move your mouse cursor to the top left corner until it turns into a target icon. Then right-click and a window will pop up. Choose the first option, and the mouse cursor will turn into a separator. You'll see a vertical line moving with it. This means that whenever you left-click, a new viewport will be created. If you want a full explanation of this, check out episode 12 of Season 1 of Blender Story on our channel. Now let's click in the top left corner to open the Editor Type menu. From here, select Drivers. Next, right-click on X Rotation and choose Add Driver. Now our driver will show up in this section, and we can easily access and control it. You'll also see the graph editor here, but we don't need that for now. So I'm just going to drag this window and make it a bit bigger. On the left side, you can see the list of drivers created for the selected bone. On the right side of this window, you'll see several tabs. We'll be working with the driver tab for now, so let's click on it to open the settings for the driver we just created. In this window, we'll customize the driver settings. The type setting determines how input variables are processed to calculate the final value of the driven property. If you click on it, you'll see different types of drivers. But for now, you don't need to learn all of them. What we need right now is just the scripted expression. Scripted expression allows you to use custom Python code to define how the driver variables affect the driven property. This is the type we're going to use most of the time. The driver value is the calculated result of the driver's setup. It's mainly for debugging, helping you make sure the driver is working correctly. This field lets you write a custom Python expression to decide how the input variables affect the driven property. To make these connections, drivers use variables to refer to specific data, like object transformations or custom properties. Adding and setting up these variables is an essential step in creating a functional driver. To create a variable, just click on Add Input Variable. You can add several variables, but I recommend not doing that until you're comfortable with how it works, because it might get confusing. To remove a variable, simply click the X next to it. Now we have one variable, and it has several parts that ask for information. In this section, we can set its name. The variable names need to follow specific rules to work properly in Blender. The first rule is that the name must start with a letter. For example, I can name it var1, but if I put one at the beginning, I'll get an error, and the driver won't work. The second rule is to avoid using spaces or periods in the name. In other words, use underscores for spacing. Otherwise, you'll run into errors again. So I'll name this variable nec_var, and I'll enter the same name here. Be careful, when you change the name of the variable, make sure to update the name in this section too. This is important because the expression is the one calling your variable and telling it what to do. If the names don't match, or if the name isn't defined here, you'll get an error. Next to the name field, there's a window where we need to specify the type of the variable. For now, we're going to use single property. A single property refers to a specific attribute of a data block, like an object's location or a custom property. In this section, we have ID type, which defines the type of data block. Next to it, there's the ID, where we can use the eyedropper tool to select something in the scene and link it to the driver. I'll select the eyedropper and choose Luxo Rig. In this part, we need to enter the path of the custom property. There are two ways to do this. We can hover over the nec property, press Ctrl-Shift-C to copy the data path, and then paste it here with Ctrl-V. Alternatively, we can right-click on the nec property and select Copy Data Path. Great, now I'll click Update to make sure the changes are applied and there are no errors. The exciting moment has arrived. From now on, any data you give to the nec property, the next X rotation has to follow it. Let's test it out. I can click here and enter the desired angle. Awesome! By clicking and dragging, we can smoothly adjust the change. I'll press backspace to reset it back to the default value. Keep in mind, once you apply a driver to a property, you won't be able to change it directly anymore. If I click on the X rotation of the nec, we can see the expression code here. If we enter a number here, we're actually changing the expression code, and the driver settings will break. So, I'll copy nec_var again and paste it in the expression field. Well, the first operation is completed successfully. Now we can create the next custom property to control the rotation of the shade. To access the shade, I go to the Bone Collection section and enable all bones. I click on the shade, and as we know, its Z-axis is pointing upwards, so the rotation will occur around the Z-axis. I click on the neck again and create a new property in the Bone Property section. I click on the gear and go into the settings. I leave the type as float and change the name to shade_Z rotation and set the default value to 0 and the hard limit from -3.14 to +3.14. Set the step to 5. Lastly, I set the subtype to angle. I'll click OK and I'll press backspace to reset its value to default. That's it for the second custom property. Right now, I'll right-click on it and copy its data path. Click on the shade, go into its settings, and set the rotation mode to XYZ. I right-click on Z rotation and click on Add Driver to create a driver for it. I select the created driver here to proceed with the settings. I name the variable shade_var. I'm going to add the same name in the expression field too. I change the type of the variable to single property. With the eyedropper tool, I link the Luxo rig and paste the shade property path that we copied earlier here. Now I press Update to apply the changes. Lastly, to test it, I go to the next settings, and to our amazement, when we change the shade property, the shade bone rotates around its local Z-axis. I'll adjust the view a bit so we can see it better. Great! But it's not over yet. When we change the shade property, the shade rotates and works correctly, but our custom shape doesn't move. To see this change on the CS neck, there are two ways. The first way is to create a driver for the Y rotation of the neck to follow the shade property, but this is not the right approach, because in this case, the neck will rotate, and that's not what we want. The second way is to go to the CS neck settings and create a driver for the YCS neck rotation to follow the shade property. In this case, only the CS neck will rotate, and it won't affect the bone. So I right-click on Y rotation and click on Add Driver. We see that a new driver for Y custom shape rotation has been added here, and by clicking on it, we can go to its settings. I change the type to single property. I name it YCS_neck_var. I copy it and paste it here as well. In this section, I select Luxo Rig. I right-click on the shade property and select Copy Data Path, and then paste it here with Ctrl-V. I press Update to apply the changes. Now you can see that when we change the shade property, the CS neck rotates as well. It's amazing. I make a few adjustments in the CS neck settings, so it controls both the neck and shade. By combining custom properties and drivers, you gain precise control over rig behavior, making animation workflows smoother and more efficient. These tools help automate complex tasks, reducing manual keyframing, and making rigs more user-friendly. Practice setting up your own properties and drivers to fully understand their potential, and stay tuned for the next episode as we continue expanding your rigging skills. If you have any feedback or suggestions to improve the tutorial, feel free to write them in the comments. You can also join our Discord group through the link in the description, where any questions you have will be answered as quickly as possible. I hope you've enjoyed so far. Thank you for being with us in this episode, and see you later. Hey there! It's great to see you again in the 7th episode of Awakening 3D Models. We've made good progress so far, and now it's time to continue our journey. Let's go! In the last episode, we introduced custom properties and linked them to drivers, allowing us to create more intuitive and flexible controls. Now that our rig is more organized, stable, and interactive, let's move on to the next step. Don't forget to download the practice files for this episode from Gumroad or ArtStation, and make sure to practice. If you're ready, let's get started. In this part, we're going to learn how to connect the bones to the character with skinning or binding. Let's get started. I'm going to show you two ways to do this. The first method is connecting through bone parent. This method directly connects a mesh, or part of it, to a single bone. The whole mesh moves exactly like the bone, without bending or deforming. This works best for hard surface objects that need to move perfectly with a specific bone. To do this, first, select the mesh, then hold Shift and select the armature. Go to Pose Mode using the Control tab or from this menu and choose the bone you want. Press Ctrl-P, and in the parent menu, select Bone. As you can see, the mesh now follows the bone completely. To make it easier to select the mesh and bone at the same time, go to the Edit tab and turn off Lock Object Modes. This way, you can easily select both the mesh and the bone together. Just go to Pose Mode once, and from then on, you can select either one without any trouble. For example, I'll select the mesh first, then hold Shift and select the bone I want. Press Ctrl+P and in the parent menu, choose Bone. If you look at the outliner, you'll see the mesh is now under the armature. Now, if I select just the bone and move it, the mesh follows it perfectly. If I select the mesh, press Alt+P, and choose Clear Parent, everything goes back to how it was before. The next method is Weights Parent. This method uses vertex weights to control how much each bone affects different parts of the mesh. It allows for smooth bending and stretching, which makes it perfect for organic models like humans or animals that need to be flexible. But you can also use this method for hard surface objects if needed. In this method, we decide which bone controls which parts of the mesh and how much influence it has. So, the first step is to group the vertices we want to control. If I select one of the meshes in the Object Data tab, you'll see the Vertex Groups section. This is where we create groups for the vertices. Using the plus and minus buttons here, we can add new groups or delete them. Here's an important thing to remember. The name of each group you create must match the name of the bone you want to control that group. This is where proper and logical naming becomes really important. Let's see how it works in action. I'm going to select Target 1 and create a new group in the Vertex Group section. To assign vertices to this group, I'll go into Edit mode and select the vertices I want. Since I want all the vertices to be included, all you gotta do is hover your mouse over the mesh and press L. This will select all connected vertices. When we're in Edit mode, some extra options show up here. To add vertices to a group, we use Assign, and to remove them, we use Remove. With these two options, we can select or deselect vertices that are assigned to the group. Below them, you'll see Weight, but we're not going to touch that for now. We'll keep it at 1. Now, to make this group follow a bone, I'll go to the Modifiers tab, click Add Modifier, and under Deform, choose Armature. For the object, I'll select Armature, and in the Vertex Group field, I'll choose the group I created. Let's see what happens. To test it out, I'll switch to Object Mode, select Bone 1, and move it around by pressing G. You'll see, nothing happens. I'll select Target 1 and go back to the Vertex Group section. The group we create here does two things. It decides which vertices to include, and also determines which bone controls those vertices. To make the second part work, the group name must match the name of the bone you want to control it. This way, the software knows which bone to connect to the group. In this case, the vertices are grouped, but in the modifier we created, the software looks for a bone with the same name in the armature we selected. Since there's no bone with that name, nothing happens. To fix this, I'll change the name of the vertex group. I'll double-click the group name and change it to Bone 1. Make sure to pay attention to uppercase and lowercase letters because the software sees them as different names. After changing the name, go back to the modifier section and reselect the vertex group in the field. Now if I select Bone 1 and move it, you'll see Target 1 follows the bone correctly. To avoid typos when naming vertex groups, there's another way to create groups. I'm selecting the mesh by clicking on it. I'll delete this modifier, go back to Object Data, and delete this group too. I'll select Target 1, hold Shift, and click on the armature. It doesn't matter which bone you click on. I'll press Ctrl P and choose with empty groups from this menu. If I select Target 1, in the Vertex Group section, you'll see two groups created with the names of the bones in our armature. Also, if I go to the Modifiers tab, I'll see an armature modifier has been created. Now, I just need to assign the vertex group I want. This method speeds up the process and helps avoid mistakes. Now in this field, I'll select Bone 1, then jump back to Object Data and click on Bone 1. Then, I'll go into Edit mode. Just hover over the mesh and press L to select all connected vertices. Finally, I'll click Assign. When you assign vertices, a new window called Vertex Weights pops up. This window shows how much influence the vertex groups have on the selected vertices. It helps you fine-tune the weight values manually. For now, just know that these values should be in the Deform tab. Let's go back to the main project and apply what we've learned. First, I'll go to the Edit tab and turn off Lock Object Modes. In the Bone collection, I'll enable all bones, and in the Viewport display, I'll turn off Shapes so I can see all bones. Next, I'll select all parts of the character. Make sure everything is selected except the springs, because we'll use a different method for rigging the springs. Now, I'll hold Shift and select the armature. It doesn't matter which bone I click on. I'll press Ctrl P and choose with empty groups from the list. If I select one part of the character, a group has been created for each bone with the same name. This makes our job easier. I'll press Tab to go into Edit mode and see that these groups are empty. No vertices are assigned yet. We need to assign each part of the character to the correct group. If I go to the Modifiers tab, I'll see an Armature modifier has been created, and Luxo Rig is assigned. Now, I just need to assign the vertex group I want so the armature can control that part of the character. Let's start with the base. I'll go to Object Data, select Base from the list, and assign all the vertices of the base to it. Right after assigning, the Vertex Weights window shows up. It tells us that the selected vertices are assigned to the base group with a weight of 1. Now I'll go to the Modifiers tab, click on this field, and select Base. To test it, I'll press Tab to go back to Object Mode, select the base bone, and move it with G. You'll see the base follows the bone perfectly. We'll use the same method to connect the other parts to their corresponding bones. I'll select Fork Block and go into Edit mode. Just hover over the mesh and hit L to select the vertices. For parts that aren't connected, I'll do the same thing. Hover over them and press L. I'll keep doing this until all vertices are selected. We could also hold Shift, select one vertex from each part, and press Ctrl L to select all connected vertices. Use whichever method feels easier for you. Now, in this field, I can assign fork block. I'll go to Object Data, and in the vertex groups, I'll assign these vertices to fork block. I'll press Tab to go back to Object Mode, select Back Arm, go into Edit Mode, hover over them and press L. Now from this list, I'll assign it to Back Arm. Now heading to Modifiers, I'll assign Back Arm to this modifier. I'll repeat the same process for the other parts. For Sidearm, I'll assign Sidearm to Modifier. I'll press Tab to go into Edit Mode, select one vertex from its different parts, press Ctrl L to select all vertices, going to the Object Data, find Sidearm in the list, and assign it. Next, I'll do the same for Elbow. OK. And assign it. Alright. Now let's move on to Top Back Arm. Selecting it and assigning all its vertices just like we did before. There we go. Next up is Top Side Arm. Let's carefully select all its components before assigning. Perfect. Now for the bridle section. Making sure we get all those vertices selected properly. Great. After that comes the neck. I move my mouse over the mesh, press L for all connected ones, and assign. And finally, we'll tackle the shade. Same process. Select, add it to the modifier, and assign the points to their own group. Now for the lamp, no vertex group was created. Probably when we were selecting the character parts, the lamp was missed. No problem. I'll select the lamp, hold Shift, and select the armature. Then, I'll press Ctrl P and choose with empty groups. Now if I select the lamp, I'll see the groups have been created for it. Since I want the lamp to follow the shade bone, I'll select its vertices and assign them to shade. In the modifier, I'll assign shade as well. Perfect. Now, except for the springs, the entire character is connected to the armature and should follow it. Let's test it together. I'll select base and move it with G. You'll see all parts follow it as expected, except for linkage. So I'll select linkage, go into Edit Mode, select all its vertices, and assign them to its group, which is root. We made root responsible for rotating around the y-axis. Now if I select base again and move it, everything works as planned. Let's test the other parts to make sure they work correctly. I'll turn off names in the Object Data tab to see everything more clearly. As you can see, all parts follow their corresponding bones, which means we've successfully rigged our first character and everything is working as it should. It's so good. If you notice any issues during testing, don't worry. It's completely normal, especially in rigging. Rigging can be tricky, and mistakes can happen. So, no need to stress. Just make sure you follow the steps correctly, and if you run into any problems, review your process. Don't forget to save your file frequently after each step. This can be a huge help if something goes wrong. And if you still can't figure out the problem, no worries. Just join our Discord using the link in the video description and ask your question there. I'll be there to answer your questions as soon as possible, so don't hesitate to join and be part of the community. Thanks for joining me in this episode. I'll see you in the next one, and have a good time. Hey there! Welcome to the new episode of the Awakening 3D Models series. This is episode 8. And we're gonna learn some really cool stuff today. So, stay with me. In the last episode, we learned about skinning and checked out 2 different ways to do it. but we picked one method that works best for our project and used it to skin our character. Also, we connected the whole character to the rig, except for the springs. And in this episode, we're going to look at 2 ways to rig those springs. So, stay with me. Sounds fun, right? Let's dive in. Like I mentioned before, there are different ways to rig things, and depending on your project and what you already know, you might choose one method over another. In this episode, we're going to check out 2 different ways to rig a spring, so you can pick the one that works best for your project. We're going to use a spline object for both methods. The first method is super simple and fast. Let's jump in. First, hold down Control, and go to the Preferences menu. In the search field, type Extra to make sure Add Curve, Extra Objects is turned on. Now we can close this window. Press Shift-A, go to Curve, then Spirals, and choose Archimedean. Make sure the spiral type is set to Archimedean, and the spiral direction is set to counterclockwise. From this section, we can adjust things like radius growth and the overall radius of the curve. I'm also going to add a bit of height here. Let's set it to 0.5. Then I'll come back here and increase the turns to 10. Set the step to 10 as well. For output curve type, I'm picking Bezier, and I'm setting this last one to auto. All right, I'll just click outside this panel to close it. Let's name this object Spring GEO, and I'll also name the data the same. Okay, now I'll go to the Data tab, and in the Geometry section, I'll give it a bit of depth. Now I press Tab to switch to Object Mode, and here I'll create 3 shape keys. We don't need to touch the basis key. I'll name this one Squash, and set the value to 1. I'll name the next one Stretch, and also set this to 1. Now I press Tab again to go into Edit mode, and I'll click on the Squash shape key. First, set the Transform Pivot Point to 3D Cursor. I press L to select all the points. Then I'll scale it down along the Z-axis, until the spring looks as compressed as I want. I think this looks good for now. Now I'll select the Stretch key, and scale it up along the Z-axis, until the spring looks stretched enough. Now if we go back to Object Mode and play with these values, you can see the spring compresses and stretches nicely. Alright, next we're going to bring in an armature to control this better. Press Shift-A and add an armature. I'll name it Spring Rig, and also set the same name for the data. Let's go into Edit mode, rotate the bone 90 degrees on the Y-axis, and rename this bone to Root. From the Snap menu, I'll choose Vertex. Then I'll press Shift-D to duplicate the bone, and hold Control to snap it up along the Z-axis, right to this vertex. And I'll name this one Top. Now I press Control-Tab to switch to Pose mode, and then hit N to open the Transform panel. I'll right-click on the Z location, and choose Copy as New Driver. Now I go to the Data tab for the spring, right-click on the shape key values we created earlier, and choose Paste Driver. This is a super quick way to set up a driver. Next, I move my mouse to the corner here. Click and drag to create a new area. I press Shift F6 twice to switch to the driver editor. On the left side, we can see the squash and stretch values, and in the middle, we see their graph editor view. I'm not going to explain the whole graph editor now. Just know that the horizontal line shows the timeline, and the vertical line shows how things change over time. This diagonal line here is the graph of our drivers, both controlled by the Z location of the top bone. Right now they're stacked on top of each other. Over here, by clicking the eye icons, we can choose which driver to show in the graph editor. First, I select all the key points, press T, and from this menu, I choose Linear, so all points get a linear shape. Now, I'll turn off Stretch and click on Squash. If I click on this keyframe, you'll see 2 values appear on the right. The value is the max amount of squash, and the keyframe shows how far the top bone moves on the Z-axis. Basically, we need to tell Blender how much should the top bone move so that squash reaches 1. If you look here, the top bone needs to move down when squashing. So the number we enter here should be negative. For now, I'll set it to -3.
As you can see, the keyframe moved. And now, on this graph, when the top bone moves down to -3, the squash value smoothly goes up to 1. Alright, now let's work on stretch. I'll turn off squash and turn on stretch. I'll click on this keyframe. And since stretch happens when the bone moves up on the z-axis, I'll set this one to 3. Now I'll turn both drivers on to see what's happening. Based on our setup, when the top bone moves down to -3, squash goes to 1. And when it moves up to +3, stretch goes to 1. Let's test it out. I select the top bone and move it down along the z-axis. And yeah, it works just like we wanted. Now I'll move it up. You can see the spring stretches and stops right there. But look here, there's a little gap between the bone and the spring. To fix that, I select the spring and change the keyframe values to -2 for squash and 4 for stretch. Now when I move the top bone, everything matches up perfectly. And that's it for the first method of rigging the spring. Alright, let's go for the second method. Just like before, I press Shift-A, go to Curve, Spirals, and choose Archimedean to create a new curve. I press Numpad 1 to go to Front View, and repeat the same settings as before for this one too. Now I go back to Object Mode, and with Shift-A, I add a new armature. I name it Spring Rig, and I give the same name to its data. Then I rename the curve to Spring GEO, and also give it the same name to its data. Next, I select the armature, go to Edit Mode, and rotate the bone 90 degrees, like this. I scale it up just a bit, and name it Root. I set the snap type to Vertex. Then from this point, I press E to extrude, and while holding Control, I move it up on Z until it snaps to this vertex. Now I extrude one more time, like this. I'll name this one Stretch, and the next one Stretch Target. I hold Shift to select these two first, then select Root, press Ctrl P, and choose Keep Offset. Alright, so this one is Root, which we'll use for overall transforms. This bone here will handle the squash and stretch of the spring, and this one will control the direction and the amount of that deformation. Cool, let's go to pose mode. For this bone here, I'll add a constraint called Stretch 2. I pick Spring Rig as the target, and in this field, choose Stretch Target. Now when I move the Stretch Target, you'll see that the middle bone squashes or stretches depending on its position. Next, let's set up the spring. To make it easier to select multiple objects at the same time, I go here and uncheck Lock Object Modes. Now I can select the spring easily. Then I go to the Modifiers tab. And from the Deform section, I add a Hook modifier. I set the object to Spring Rig and choose the stretch bone. If we were using a mesh object, we'd create a vertex group first and assign that group here in the modifier. But since we're using a curve, it's even easier. I just go to Edit Mode, select the vertices I want, and hit Assign in the Hook section. That's it. So I move the mouse over the spring and press L to select all the connected vertices. Then I assign them to the hook. Before we test it, I'll go to the Data tab, and in the Geometry section, I'll add some depth so we can clearly see what's happening. That amount looks good. Back to Object Mode, and now I select the bone. When I move it, boom! The spring is rigged nice and simple. But if you look closely, you'll see that it deforms not just in the Z direction, but also in the other directions. No problem. Just select this bone, go to the stretch constraint, and set this option here to none, and done. Our spring rig is complete. Now we can confidently move on and start rigging Luxo Jr's springs. As you can see, we've got 4 springs, but we only need to rig 2 of them. Then we can use Mirror to get the other 2. Let me show you how to do it step by step. Let's start with the spring that's placed between the fork block and the sidearm. Here's the thing that makes these springs a bit different from our previous examples. Each of them has 2 hooks, one on each side, and they're connected to these pins. So let me walk you through how we're going to handle that. First, I'm going to declutter the scene a bit so I can work more easily. Holding Shift, I select the fork block, sidearm, top sidearm, elbow, and the IK controller. I create a temporary collection and assign them all to it. Then I hide the other collections so we can just focus on these. Like I mentioned earlier, a rigging artist should also know a bit of modeling, because sometimes you need to make small adjustments to get things working right. In this case, we need to build the spring manually using a curve object. To save time in this video, I've already prepared these springs, and you'll find them in the practice file for this part. You can download it from ArtStation or Gumroad. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask in our Discord group. The link's in the description, and you'll get your answer as fast as possible. Alright, for rigging these springs, I'm going to use the second method we just learned. First, we need to mark the main points where the bones should be placed. I select the fork block and go into edit mode, then Shift-Alt and click between these vertices to select this loop. I press Shift-S to bring the cursor right here, back to object mode. I press Shift-A to add an empty. Sphere is good, just to mark this point. I scale it down a bit, then head over to the Object tab, and turn on in front to see it better. Okay. I select the spring, and in the Data tab, I temporarily set the depth to 0. While checking that orientation mode is set to global, and snap mode is on vertex, and while holding Control, I move the empty along the x-axis to align it with this hook. Now I repeat the same for the sidearm. I go into its edit mode, use Shift-Alt to select this loop, and move the cursor there. Back in object mode, I duplicate the empty, snap it to the new cursor, and then move it slightly to the right using Control, so it's aligned with the bottom empty. Now we can place the bones. I select the Luxo rig, go into edit mode, press Shift-A to add a new bone, and move it to this point using Control. I select its tail and snap it to this empty. Then I scale the bone down a bit. I change the orientation mode to normal, duplicate the bone, and move it along the y-axis to this vertex, since the squash and stretch starts from here. I also move its tail, snapping it to this vertex, which is the end of the squash and stretch. Then, I duplicate that bone again, and snap it to this empty. I hit Alt-F to flip the bone direction. So basically, these two bones will control both sides of the spring, and the middle one will handle the squash and stretch. We also need another bone at this point, to determine how much squash and stretch should happen. I select this one, and hit E to extrude a bone along the x-axis. Alright, now that all bones are placed, I go to the Data tab, turn on axes, and check their roll values to make sure they're correct. Okay, looks like there's no problem. So, I turn off axes. Let's move on to naming the bones. I'll name this one D spring bottom. The D stands for down. This one, D spring top. This one, D spring stretch. And this one, D spring STT, which stands for stretch target. This one should follow the fork block, so I select it first, then select fork block and press Ctrl P and keep offset. This one should follow the previous one, so I do the same. Ctrl P, keep offset. These two should follow the sidearm, so I select them, then select sidearm and press Ctrl P, keep offset. Now let's go to pose mode to see how everything is coming together. There's a small mistake. Instead of parenting these two to the sidearm, I accidentally parented them to the top sidearm. So I go back to edit mode, select them again, and parent them to the sidearm. Perfect. I go back to pose mode and check it again. It works correctly. To make sure the squash and stretch is applied to the middle bone, I add a stretch to constraint for it. I set the target to Luxo rig and the bone to D spring STT. I also set this one to none. Now if we test it, we see that squash and stretch is working perfectly. Next, let's bind or skin the spring to the rig. I select the spring, going to edit mode. In the Modifiers tab, I add a hook modifier under the Deform section. I need 3 hook modifiers, 1 for the middle and 2 for the top and bottom hooks. So, from the same hook modifier, I duplicate 2 more modifiers. I name the first one D-spring top hook, the second one D-spring stretch hook, and the third one D-spring bottom hook. For all of them, I select Luxo rig as the object. For the bones, I assign the first one to D-spring top, the second one to D-spring stretch, and the third one to D-spring bottom. Okay, very well. I select this vertex, hold Ctrl, and press numpad plus to select these vertices. I assign them to the D-spring top hook. Then I move to the bottom hook. Select the initial vertex. Press numpad plus to select these vertices. And then assign them. There is the select option here, which selects the vertices assigned to the modifier. I select the vertices assigned to both of these modifiers, then move the mouse into the scene. Press Ctrl I to invert the selection, and then assign these vertices to the stretch hook. Now, if I move the IK, we see that the squash and stretch is beautifully applied to the spring. I select the spring and give it a bit of depth in the Data tab to better monitor the process. Squash and stretch is working well, but there are some weaknesses at the points related to the hooks. The reason for this is that when the spring moves, both hooks should always be in the same direction, rotating around their pins. It's very simple to fix this. We just need to use a damped track. First, I create a damped track for this one. Set the target to Luxo rig and select the bone as D-spring bottom. Then I go to the other one and create a damped track for this one as well. Set the object to Luxo rig and select the bone as D-spring top. Let's test it. These two should not separate from each other. All we need to do is go back to edit mode and parent the stretch target to the spring top. Okay, now we see that in any situation, they are aligned in the same direction and rotate around their pins. There's just one more thing left. If I move the IK and press Alt-G to return to the default position, we see that this bone stays in its previous position. I need to press Alt-G again to bring it back to the initial position. To solve this, I just need to go to edit mode, duplicate this bone, scale it down, and name it D-spring target. I return to pose mode, and in the constraint tab for this bone, I replace spring bottom with spring target. Since we duplicated this bone, the constraint applied to spring bottom is also on the new bone. So, I'm going to remove this constraint. Congratulations! The first spring of our character is rigged and is reacting exactly how we wanted. Anytime you want, you can go to the Modifier tab of the spring and apply the subdivision modifier from the Generate section to get a smoother shape. Again, from the Generate section, I select Mirror and set the fork block as the reference for this mirror in this field. Very good. We've rigged one spring, but now we have two springs that both behave in the same way. Now let's move to the next spring, which connects the top side arm to the elbow. I select the top side arm and go into edit mode. I hover over this part and press L to select all the vertices in this area. Then, with Shift S, I bring the cursor here. I select one of the sphere empties that we used earlier and use Shift S to snap it to where the cursor is. Now, I select the elbow, go into edit mode, press Shift Alt, and select the loop between these vertices. Then, I bring the cursor here using Shift S. I move the sphere empty I created to this point. Now I go to the Data tab for the spring and set its depth to 0, so I can see the vertices more clearly. I also set the orientation mode to normal and click the plus to create a new orientation mode based on the spring's normal. Next, I select this empty and move the cursor here. Then I go to edit mode on the rig and press Shift A to add a new bone. I move this bone along the y-axis so it's placed at this point, where squash and stretch should start. I snap the tail to this empty with Control, but then move it along the y-axis to this point, where the other side of the squash and stretch for the spring is located. I select the bone and press Shift-N to fix its roll. I create a duplicate, scale it down, and snap it to the cursor. Then, I create another duplicate of this, snap it to this empty using Control, and press Alt-F to switch its direction. Next, I create a new bone along the x-axis at this point with E. Great. The bone placement is done. I turn on axes to check the rolls. The roll of this bone isn't in the right direction, so I press Shift-N and select Global Z-axis. Now let's do the naming. With F2, I name this one U-Spring Stretch. This one becomes U-Spring Bottom. This one is U-Spring Top. And this one is U-Spring STT. We forgot one bone. I create a duplicate from this bone, set the pivot to active element, scale it down, and name it U-Spring Target. I parent bottom and target bones to top sidearm. I parent the stretch bone to the bottom bone. I parent STT to top. I turn on this collection so I can see the top back arm, and then parent top to top back arm. I go to pose mode, and for this bone, I add a stretch to constraint. Set the target to Luxo rig, and the bone to U-Spring STT. I also set this to none, so the squash and stretch happens only along the y-axis. I add a damp track constraint to this bone. Set the target as Luxo rig, bone is U-Spring target. Also for this one, I create another damp track. Target is Luxo rig, and bone is U-Spring top. Now I select the spring, go to the Modifier tab, and add 3 hook modifiers. The first one is U-Spring top hook. The second is U-Spring stretch hook. The third is U-Spring bottom hook. For this one, first I select Luxo rig, then U-Spring top. For this one, first Luxo rig, then U-Spring stretch. And for this, Luxo rig, then U-Spring bottom. I go to edit mode. Select these vertices and assign them to the top. Then I go to this next side. Select these vertices and assign them to the bottom. Now I select both sets. Press Ctrl-I to invert the selection and assign those to stretch. I go to the Data tab and give it a little depth so I can double-check everything more precisely. Everything looks good? Awesome. Now I can go to the Modifier tab of the spring and add a subdivision modifier from the Generate section. Also add a mirror modifier. And here, I choose top back arm as the mirror reference. And done. Just like that, the springs are rigged too. As always, after every change, we do a quick test to make sure everything's working right. We don't really need these empties anymore, so why not just delete them? I hope you enjoyed this episode too. I'd really love to hear your thoughts and suggestions in the comments, and you can be sure we'll do our best to keep you satisfied. Okay, starting now, I'll be giving shoutouts to our Patreon supporters beginning the month after they join. That way, it doesn't matter if you join at the start or end of the month. You'll still get a full month of mentions in the videos. And for this month, a huge thank you to Eric Retania for the support. You're helping us keep these tutorials free for everyone, and we truly appreciate it. If you'd like to support what we're doing, you can join us at patreon.com/MiM_Repository. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Hey friends, welcome to the final episode of the free course Awakening 3D Models. In the previous episode, we explored two super useful, easy, and fast ways to rig a spring, and we picked one of them to rig our character's spring. But in episode 9 of this course, we're gonna do a final check to see if there's any issue with the rig and fix it if needed. We'll also make some adjustments if necessary. And finally, we'll get to know some constraints that are really helpful for limiting the movement of a rigged character. Let's dive in. To check the rig's performance, I start from the top of the hierarchy. I select the base and test it by increasing and decreasing the scale to see how it behaves. As you can see, when we scale the character up, its base moves below the grid, and when we scale it down, the base rises above the grid. But ideally, no matter how we scale the character, its lowest point, the part touching the grid, should always stay right on the grid surface. I press Tab to go into edit mode. If the cursor isn't at the center of the scene, just press Shift-C to snap it there. Then, with Shift-S, move it to the origin point. If you want, you can also move the root here using Shift-S, but it's not necessary. To double-check, I increase the scale again, and we can see that the base works correctly in its place. But if we zoom in and take a closer look at the springs, something strange happens. The scale on the springs isn't uniform. That's because we use the hook modifier, and this modifier creates that limitation. One of the easiest ways to fix this issue is select the spring and go to the Object Constraint tab. Make sure it's the Object Constraint tab. From here, I add a child of constraint. I set the target to Luxo rig and the bone to base. Perfect. The problem is fixed. I only want it to follow the scale, so I turn off location and rotation. We need to do the same for the top spring as well. Instead of repeating all the steps again, we just need to first select the top spring, and then, while holding Shift, select the bottom spring to make it the active object. Now all we have to do is click here and hit Copy to Selected. As you can see, the constraint has been applied to the top spring as well. Now the issue with both springs is resolved. Now when I increase or decrease the scale, there's no issue anymore. I press Alt-S to reset the scale back to its default value. Okay, let's see if movement works correctly too. As you can see, it works fine along the Y-axis and along the Z-axis. But if I move it along the X-axis, the springs created with the mirror modifier move in the opposite direction. That's because the mirror modifier in Blender behaves differently in this situation. This was the issue I mentioned in the description of the previous episode. Actually, the only goal of this course wasn't to create a perfect rig, but instead to explore common mistakes and fix them together. These are things you'll learn with experience and practice. What I want from you is, don't worry if you face problems like this, there's always a solution. Let's fix it together. First, we need to make a duplicate of this spring and place it on the other side. To start, I select the fork block and go into edit mode. Using L, I select these vertices to place the 3D cursor here, because I want to rotate the spring around this point. I also set the transform orientation to global, and the transform pivot point to 3D cursor. Now I select the spring and remove the mirror modifier from the modifier tab. Then I go into edit mode, select all vertices, and press Shift-D to duplicate them. Next, I press S, then X, and type -1. As you can see, we mirrored the spring manually without using the modifier. Now I press P and separate these vertices, so we have a new spring. I rename this one with a .R at the end for right, and the other one with .L for left. Now I go to the Armature's edit mode, and with Symmetrize, I create the spring bones on the other side. A key point before using Symmetrize is, bones should be named with left and right suffixes, and the separation should be done using a dot, like .R or .L, so Blender can recognize and flip them properly. So I add .L to the end of all these bones. Then I select all these bones, and from the Armature menu, I choose Symmetrize. All the selected bones are now symmetrical on the other side, and their suffix changed from .l to .r. Now all we need to do is go to the modifiers of the new spring, and in the bone fields, replace the existing bones with the ones that have the same name but with .r at the end. dSpringTop.r, dSpringStretch.r, and dSpringBottom.r. Okay, we're going to do the same steps for the top spring. I select the vertices of this pin, then with Shift S, I bring the cursor to the center of it. I select the spring and remove the mirror modifier from the modifiers tab. Then I go into edit mode and select all the vertices. Press Shift D to duplicate, then S, X, and type -1 to mirror it manually. And finally, I press P and separate it. Perfect. I add .R to this one and .L to that one. Now I select the armature and go into edit mode. First, I add .L to the end of all these bone names. Yep, that's done. I select these bones. From the Armature tab, I apply Symmetrize. Great. Now all I need to do is go to the spring modifier and replace the bones with the ones that have the .r suffix. And that's it. For testing, I set the transform mode back to active element. And as you can see, it's working perfectly in all directions. That's done. All right, let's move on to the rest. The root bone is supposed to handle rotation. It's doing the job, but it's better to set this to Euler, so it rotates based on degrees. Perfect. I want the base geo and linkage geo to follow when I move the linkage upward. To do that, I'm going to use an object constraint for both of them. I add a copy location to this. I set the target to Luxo Rig, and in this field, I pick linkage. Now to figure out which axis I need, I change the orientation mode to local. As you can see in linkage, the y-axis is pointing up, but for base geo, it's different. So I only enable y here. I tick offset to keep the distance between them. In this section, I set the target space to local space, and for the owner, which is base geo, I set it to custom space. Then choose Luxo Rig and linkage. Now, if I move the linkage upward, the base moves along with it. We need to do the same process for the linkage geo as well, but we've already learned a faster way. First, I select the linkage and then the base. And from here, I choose the copy to selected option. And that's it, super easy. Now, from the Object Data tab of the Armature, I enable Shapes so I can make changes to the custom shapes. We need to make a small change to this shape. So I unhide the custom shapes. Okay. I select this and temporarily set its depth to 0. I make a duplicate of it. Then I go to Edit mode and select these points. I hit Separate and Delete in the Object mode. I bring the cursor here, go into Edit mode, and select all the points. I set the Transform mode to 3D cursor. I duplicate it again, rotating it 90 degrees around the Z-axis, and repeat this until the circle is complete. I also give it a little depth, and that's it. Since we're creating a controller, there's no need to worry about merging the points. It won't cause any issues. Now I move on to this one. First, I press Shift S to bring the cursor here. I enter Edit mode, select these points, hit P, and separate. I switch to Object mode and delete it. Then go back to Edit mode, select all points, and duplicate it, rotating it 90 degrees around the Z-axis until the circle is complete. I give it a little more depth. Perfect. I name this one Linkage. Since a custom shape with this name already exists, it automatically adds the suffix. I delete the old linkage shape and rename this one again. Okay. Rename this one to Root. Excellent. I also rename this collection to Custom Shapes. then hide it again. Now I go to the Armature. Select Linkage, and in the Bone tab, I assign CS linkage to it. I rotate it -90 degrees around the x-axis and slightly increase its scale. Also, for the root, I select CS root, that's all. In the Data tab, I assign linkage to controller's collection. After that, I turn off all bones so I only see the controllers. Then I can select these and assign them to all bones. Great. I congratulate everyone. The rigging of our character is complete, and everything that needed to be applied to the character has been done. Before continuing, huge thanks to everyone supporting us this month. Special shout out to Eric Retania for helping us keep these tutorials free. We couldn't do this without you. If you want to support, join us at patreon.com/MiM-Repository. Thanks for watching. Let's continue. There may only be some adjustments made based on our different expectations for the character. For example, creating movement limits for the bones is something we'll do based on our expectations for the character in coordination with the animator. Let me point out a few examples of these limits as the final note for this course. As you know, root is only supposed to rotate the character around the y-axis, so we don't need any other transforms. That's why I lock everything except Y rotation. Linkage should only move along the y-axis, so I lock the rest of its transforms as well. For the pole target, I leave only the X location unlocked. For the IK controller, I lock both its rotation and scale. And for this one, I lock all transforms, as it will be controlled by the custom properties we created. Very well, this is one type of limitation. Another type of limitation is the use of the constraints available in the constraints section. For example, for the IK controller, we can create a limit distance and define the point of limitation. In this case, I'm setting linkage as the target. In the distance field, I need to specify the minimum or maximum distance from the linkage. Why minimum or maximum? Because of this option. If we imagine a circle with the radius being the distance, inside allows movement within the circle and prevents exiting it, while outside works the opposite, allowing movement outside the circle but preventing entry. And on surface allows movement only on the surface of the circle. Let me show you. I'll set it to inside. To find the distance value, all I need to do is deactivate the constraint, set the distance to 0, and move the bone until I want to allow this bone to move away from the linkage. This looks good. Now when I activate the constraint, Blender automatically detects the distance and applies it here. As you can see, the constraint is applied, and the IK is now restricted from moving farther than the specified distance. Now I'll create a duplicate of this and deactivate it. In this section, I'll select outside. I'll lower the IK until I want to allow it to get closer to the linkage. This point looks good. I'll set the distance to 0 and activate the constraint. Now, we can see that the IK is limited between these two distances. These constraints are very useful and necessary, and they are applied to the rig based on our project needs. The other limits work in the same way, and you can use them as needed. For example, if I create a limit location for the pole target, I can control its minimum and maximum movement in different directions. For instance, I'll set the X minimum to -4 and the maximum to 4. Now we can see that its movement is restricted, and it can't move beyond 4 or -4. Well, another useful constraint is the floor. For IK, I'll create a floor. I'll set the target to Luxo rig and the bone to base. Now, if we go to the side view, we can see that the IK can't penetrate below the base and is stopped just like hitting a solid ground surface. That's it for this one. I'll bring this custom shape to the 0 point and raise this one a little higher. Perfect. And that's the completion of the Luxo rig project. I hope this course has been useful to you and met your expectations. Stay tuned for our upcoming courses, and thank you for your support. Your support gives us the energy to create more free educational content for you. We'd love to hear your thoughts and suggestions. They really help us make better videos for everyone starting out on this exciting journey. So don't forget to leave a comment below and stay tuned for more. We'll get back to you as quickly as possible. And finally, you can download the final project for this course from ArtStation or Gumroad. And if you've got any questions, don't hesitate to ask in our Discord group. The link's in the description. Thank you for watching and have a good time.